Yeah.
Looking at the size of the book, it looks like a pretty strenuous work. What was pushing you, who or what was encouraging you to finish the project?
As opposed to keeping it going, or?
Yeah, to keep it going.
Well, I just had to, my publisher was saying, it's time. They had asked me to go back and cut out, take 100 pages out of books 1 and 2, and to cut back on 3, and I just couldn't, I mean, I had to correct some things, but I couldn't really mess with it. They said, we can't publish it. And I was saying, oh, let's do volumes, you know, it'll be in volumes, in a nice big box, but they couldn't really do it. So a little bit the form was starting to dictate the content in a way, and I think this is ridiculous. I can barely carry it around. I had you know, it in my bag, and they said, you're over the limit here. You're over 50 pounds. And they said, can you take out something? And I said, yep. And I opened that and I just took out my book.
That did it, yeah.
But I'm so, lucky to have a publisher who would do this.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And I want to say something about that. Just, you know, some of the poetry publishers in our, you know, Norma knows this as well, Joanne and others here in this room. You know, incredible camaraderie. Talk about, you know, documentation and archive.
Yeah. It's another one of these, you know, cultural institutions that has been created by artists, that has been active now for a good 50 years, you know, the small press movement, where really, you know, that has sustained writing in this country. You know, it isn't the New Yorker or whatever, you know, it isn't these major houses or corporate publishing that cares about literature.
I also felt, you know, somebody else could finish it, or, you know, it just had to kind of stop, and that the same concerns go on, and the same endless, you know, the last section of the Eternal War goes on in different forms. I mean, is it Iran now? You know, what's coming up? And then you see these circular things, you know, is Jeb Bush going to be president someday?
Those guys have been around since at least 1960.
You know, you start to see the, you know, the colors and the mechanism of concealment and that rise on. So, no, I think, and I felt good about ending it. I mean, it was time, and I really have to. And within the work on this, I also was doing other projects and other books. My favorite was the Manatee Humanity. I mean, that happened within this, and that, you know, I thought at times this is like could be a sub part of this project as well. And, you know, it's focusing on, again, you know, using a Buddhist ritual, using the manatee becomes a sort of deity of standing in for all endangered species, and it kind of fits with certain themes, and it's another animal to put in the big Iovis, but it had its own life and shape. I'm sorry, yeah?
You said it took you 25 years to write. When did you decide that you wanted to, and your editor and your publisher decided that you should stop and publish it at that point?
It wasn't quite like that, but...
Yeah, but when did you decide, within that 25 years, that you wanted to present this piece to be published?
Well, they published the first 2 books. So those came out in these smaller individually. I think one 80-something, and then 6 years later maybe, and then there was parts of the 3rd book, and then it was really in the last couple of years that the 3rd book came together as it, you know, had a shape. So that seemed enough, and there was a kind of homage to H.D. in her War Trilogy, in the sense of you know, I wasn't sure where to go. I mean, I thought I was going to be going somewhere entirely different when I started. So I just didn't know, but it felt in these times that this was the way, you know, that it could end here. But I'm not, tell me your question again. It was, there's also the Coleridge. I know what it was. There was also something I was, maybe I was teaching the long poem at Naropa to some version of that. And this Coleridge, there's a quote about the epic. And I think it's 20 years. He says, take 10 years to do the research and let it gestate, and then 10 years to, and I thought, well, that's a good, I mean, not that I was going to do it that way, although there were these periods, I mean, I consider the writing is also coming out of research and collecting, you know, random things and notes. I had little folders on different areas that I wanted to cover. But the notion of the 20 years, that seemed to me a good marker. Then it went went a little bit beyond that. But the idea that there's research that goes into it, and there's this gestation, and and then telling the story of your time, telling the story of your tribe, and traditionally, this epic is about the wars of your time, the violence and suffering of your time. So that was clearly in there. And so from the beginning, it was going to be a long project, but you never know quite where it's going. So it was just towards the end when Coffee House said, we want to do the whole thing. We know you're finishing book 3, and I was actually working this amazing project in Marrakesh, in Morocco, with people. I know Norma's been involved with working with Berber school kids, and I was getting the final proofs on email. Certain sections that weren't clear, and there was sometimes some visual thing in it. It was just also I couldn't, with just the recent life and travel. It was just so hard to. It was a very exciting, almost magical moment to be the final corrections from there, but it seemed that was the epitome of where it could go somehow. It had to do with a certain auspiciousness of time.
Yes, well, I know you were talking about the wars of our time, and I understand, I sense how you feel about that. But what about the warrior spirit? Is either a state of mind or is an archetype?
Mm-hmm.
Are you dealing with that too in the
Yeah, I think so, and I think in my own energy, my own, aggression, and born under, I've forgotten what's, Aries, I think it's April.
Yes,
So, feeling that. And then when I'm going to be 67, so when I was in school in New York in the 50s, we wore dog tags. Anybody else here wear dog tags? And we had these drills where you had to get under the desk because the atomic bomb was coming, and
That always works.
And that always works, yeah. And so I remember thinking, and people were scared. Children were questioning, and then I was later involved with the Quaker scene, and the Quakers would be out leafleting against nuclear war and so on, and you'd be hiding in the basement with your dog tag, and somehow that I remember thinking, this is not how I want to grow up and live, and there's a more creative way to be. And then my father was also in Germany when I was born, and I met him. There's a frontispiece photo of him, so met him when I was, I guess, now about 9 months. And then he had all these accoutrements of war, not spoils exactly. He didn't have any shrunken heads or anything of that nature, but in arms and a little gun thing, and anyway. So there was that feeling like I was born in. We were all of my generation sort of coming into this, and some need to investigate it. But I think the investigation also led, especially in this around the Buddhist teachings and so on. There's in the Shambhala teachings, which were developed, come from many places, but the founder of Naropa, Trigan Trungpa, has written about the Shambhala vision and the warrior, turning that around into this, transmuting that kind of energy, becoming a warrior of enlightenment and wisdom and so on. So I think that's definitely playing in. So I hope it doesn't give you nightmares, just nightmares. I don't know if that answers it, but yeah, looking into the one's own aggression and need to constantly dominate space, getting territorial, building empire. Also in the early 80s, we were building this school. We were also building this institution within a kind of empty space in the middle of the country, and trying to get that together. And so there was the idea of building your city and the walls of your city, and being a guardian and being a protector of that, and you start to think about those kinds of things. What does it take to defend your vision, so to speak? Is it a contradiction? Any kind of defense?
So basically, we have this in us So it is something, by being aware, then perhaps we can deal with it and hold our seat, as you say, between being just completely giving in to the forces of life and the other extreme of fighting them and defending.
But I think also trying to understand them. So that's where the penetration, the colors in the mechanism, looking into the mechanism. How does this work? What is the warring God realm? Why does it have to perpetuate itself? Why are we, the biggest arms dealers, selling arms to our enemies? There's constantly weaponry showing up with the United States, seal, the seal of where it's coming from. There's evidence of this kind of insane
and the
perpetuation.
black market and so-called white market.
Yeah, the black market.
Enmeshed.
Yeah, they're very enmeshed. So that's the thing, to wake up to the mechanisms, and so that you're not completely thrown off and becoming so overwhelming, and you just get so depressed and it's hopeless, or becoming in denial in a way and checking out or not paying attention. And looking at that, seeing how it works is actually helpful. It's not that you can necessarily change it or stop it, but just it wakes you up. Don't feel so victimized, and that's the whole notion of sousvalence too. That you have your imagination. Sounding too didactic. It's also there's some humor in this book.
Well, that's what I was thinking too. Is that the level of performance brings that to it at times. And I know that there's always like a sort of mocking self-humor in a lot of your presentation.
Yeah, I mean, my son is just constantly, I'm the biggest jerk, I'm, idiot. I think, why am I writing this book? I think I can make money. Oh, Anne Waldman's going to make $1. And it's, a little bit of an act of hubris.
Yeah.
Well, I want it to be useful. Maybe it could, be a pillow on a long ocean voyage. You had to sleep on the deck.
With a yoga block.
A meditation cushion.